Um, so I'm Benjamin Taylor. I am passionate about systems complexity and cybernetics, which I see as one broad, extended, fascinating field. I work mostly in public service transformation, mostly in the UK, and some other stuff, systems change around the world when I can. And it makes me sound like a CIA agent, doesn't it? But I guess the people in this room know that I'm talking about systems related change in the world, not that type. I have set an impossible agenda for 1 hour today because all of the things that I wanted to talk about are multivalent terms. They mean lots of different things to different people. And what's more, they're whole universes and whole worlds of really interesting, useful stuff. So I've tried to be very definitional. As I was saying before everybody had joined, I'm not going to be able, I would love to make this a co-exploration, but it would probably take, I want to set out quite a lot of groundwork that's all questionable and all just my perspective and all partial. But that's what I'm going to spend most of this time doing. So we may not have a lot of time. We will have some for kind of chat and questions and answers and so on. But I'm going to try and set out, I'm going to start off with the risks of thinking in this space, talk about what systems convening is and is not, and talk about its relationship to that phrase I used before, systems change, and also systems leadership. And then a very tentative definition of what I think systems thinking is, and what systems practice is, and trying to really link that back into the convening practices that the Wenger trainers identified. And we'll do a little checkout survey to hear how people have received this at the end. It'll be on the same link, just so you know, okay? We will also be using, or I'll encourage you to have a look around and leave comments on, and kind of that will be there for the future, for potential future use. A mural board, which has got most of the core content. Can everybody else hear me? Kieran says his sound has stopped. I'm getting some nods. Kieran, I'm afraid it's just you. Sorry. Oh, I'll reply in the chat. So let's just see. David Mason from Red Quadrant is going to paste the findings from the check-in survey into the mural board in due course. So keep filling in if you haven't done it. It's nice to know who's here. Where are people from? Some people are from the government. Some people are from patient safety. That's great. Most people from the UK, but we've also got Switzerland, South Africa, welcome. Delft, welcome. I like Delft. I like South Africa too, but I've never been there. India, Brazil, this is fantastic. Really exciting to hear people from all around the world, and a few different walks of life, a few university folks, a few NHS folks, a few government folks. That's a nice survey. Somebody's from Earth. That's a very systemic answer, isn't it? Dubai, Canada, and Ireland. That's great. I think I got all the countries in, and Wales. So what people want to get out of the session: knowledge, learning, understanding. I'm only offering potential, tickling of interest. I'm not offering knowledge, learning, and understanding. Sorry. Insight, synergy, getting inspired, connection. You can see all the things on the screen there. That's great. Ideas for working with hierarchies. I may not get onto that, but we'll see. How are people feeling? Curious, interested, busy, optimistic, intrigued, and one sad, busy. Sorry for the sad, busy person. So just to remind you, the link to the link to the survey is in the chat, and it'll be nice if people can continue to complete this so we get a good sample of who's in the room. We'll put it on the mural board for future reference. So there's a huge range with a fairly normal-ish clustering around how expert people consider themselves to be in this topic. There's a trick there, of course, because anybody who answers 10 by definition isn't an expert in anything systems related. But there you go. So what are people saying? Listen to some podcasts. Oh, that's nice. Can we align systems convening practices with the open? I'm not sure I understand that. You might want to clarify that in the chat if that's okay. Currently running a systems leadership community of practice. Okay, so we've got systems leadership coming in explicitly as well as systems convening. keen to learn, completely new to this, manager recommended. This is probably in at the deep end, to be perfectly honest. And somebody wanting to get a systems convening book going, perhaps paste messages in the chat if you would like to work on that. And I'm frantically pasting in the chat the survey link and the mural board link. Keen to learn, risks of different systems conveners convening in different directions. That sounds like geopolitics to me. Systems convening is the way to implement systemic transformational change. Brilliant. Okay, well, I've deactivated that poll now, haven't I? Let me just make sure it's still active. Great. Okay, and just so you know, the link to the mural, I'll probably use my slides as a quicker way of going through, but it's got a lot of reference material to the systems convening webpage. We can get the free PDF of the entire book itself, the real reference and resource. I'm just an interpreter. My main reference is a couple of links that I post blogs that I've done on systems leadership. My blogs, including the Systems Community of Inquiry, which is an overview of everything systems complexity and cybernetics, a bit of an introductory reading list. There's another event that I'm doing on the 11th of July for systems and complexity in organization, which is free, link there. And these are all double click and you open the link. And for further explanation of systems complexity and cybernetics, we have an excellent book that I'll recommend later with videos supporting it. The CIO Competency Framework, that's the professional body, as I say, for systems practice. A set of resources from CIO and the systems body of knowledge. And on the right, I've put some of the core materials that I will be going through today. So, oh, the mural link isn't working, somebody says, but that's strange because a lot of people have got in. So I don't know why, but I will just be able to grab the full link and put it in the chat. And then David, perhaps you could repost that a couple of times if it disappears upwards in the chat. Okay, so you might think, as I've emphasized, I'm just an interpreter. Who am I to share this stuff? Well, I'm just a passionate explorer. I run Red Quadrant, a consultancy in public services, PSTA, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise building capacity to transform. And I do lots of other things because I'm busy, that kind of person. So you can click on bentaylor.com if you want to connect to me on social media. Very social, very happy to connect, or find out about other stuff that I do. So getting into it properly, I'm going to start with my thing that I call 4 quadrants of threat. This is mostly a warning to myself. It's a way of orienting yourself to the powerful thinking that comes with systems thinking, complexity, and cybernetics, and so on. So it's a bit of a minefield. Actually, I think this title is a tribute to a paper that Jane Searles wrote co-wrote many years ago on the minefield of systems thinking. So this is a simple 4x4 quadrant, never adequate to capture complexity, but just gives you a flavor and a way of orienting. Somebody is noisy. Types of work. Just muting them. So there's a distinction between people who want to change the world and have power to do stuff, and people who want power over, intellectual property, money, want to, mostly do something for themselves. And there's a distinction between people who think that it's our tools that are right. That's the leading concept. We've got great ideas, who are more inclusive, more of a herd, a group, more enthusiastic, influenced by a few leaders, but a kind of great big flock of excited people, maybe a bit flighty short term, like a flock of birds is. Then there's people who are mostly focused on your tools are wrong, exclusive, mostly a few individuals, defined by grumpiness rather than enthusiasm, and a few people seeking to lead the many. They're very persistent though, long term, and they actually very often hold deep troughs of wisdom. So in the top left-hand quadrant, I say there are naive enthusiasts who will read a fantastic book like Systems Convening and go, this is it, this is going to change the world, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go out there. Or we saw this with design thinking, which is a brilliant thing, but people were, just grabbing it, as I did, by the way, with a thing called the Vanguard method, with lean, with process improvement, with about 6 or 7 things early in my career, and going, why won't they let us just, change the world with this? Why aren't these idiots running organizations and the world letting us change things? You get the idea. Then there are the popularizers who oversimplify the ideas and are just trying to get stuff out there and generate a following. and are trying to get things. They generate a lot of enthusiasm. All of these all have a place. These are all important. Then there's the curmudgeons, and many of us find ourselves moving into a bit of a curmudgeon role later in our career. I feel that tendency strongly, but I feel all of these, and that's the point. Why don't people listen to me? I know what's right. I know how this should be done. Why the hell are they not listening to me every time I charge in and tell everybody they're wrong? Then there's the gurus, and I'm being aware of the appropriation of that term from its original context. I deliberately used the Arthur Batram spelling guru to emphasize that despite I am appropriating the term, but I understand that it's problematic to do so. They want intellectual property and power. They want their thing, their closed network to be the thing. And I think what's great about this is systems convening, the whole spirit of the Wenger trainers and the spirit that they identify in systems conveners is not to be in any of these boxes, but to be in that powerful space in the middle, where you're actually trying to keep yourself, you're trying to navigate and understand. Am I being too simplistic in the idea of getting this out in the world? Am I being too naively enthusiastic and we're just going to run up against brick walls and cause other people to do so as well? Am I being curmudgeonly? Am I trying to hold tight to my intellectual property and be a guru there? All four of the problematic behaviors, despite the fact that they all have something to learn. And by the way, you're always going to think you're in the middle. All of these things are mostly defined by where you are, but nevertheless, notice the tendencies in yourself are defined by saying, this is what systems thinking is. Far better so what people are seeking is change, likes, shares, followers, others being proved wrong, followers locked in and the ground poisoned for other approaches. A much better approach is to think of systems thinking and systems convening and everything else to be constituted by the value it generates. So think about what are the outcomes that we're actually generating. So for me, that's what I use to keep myself focused. And I'm saying this as I go into explanations, because systems and complexity and cybernetics and all the things we're going to talk about today are rich, complex, powerful, sometimes overwhelming, various, and can be used for good or for evil. And we can accidentally trip ourselves into going into these quadrants really quite easily as we try to learn this stuff. Okay, so high time we got onto systems convening itself. So I'm going to talk about what it is, and really emphasizing here that I am just an interpreter. I was lucky enough to have a ride-along role as Bev and Etienne wrote the book, as did Matthew and possibly others here. But it's their material, it's their content. They were kind enough to license it under a Creative Commons license, but it requires attribution. They're the ones who did the work in an original paper and in this book, which is available, as I say, for free, thanks to organizations that very kindly sponsored it. And you won't be able to read that font too well, but the introduction to the book proper says, you may not have heard about them. What they do is rarely in their job description. You may not be even aware of what they do. They tend to act as enablers rather than taking credit or seeking the spotlight. But they are here, working on sustainable change across challenging silos, in complex social landscapes and amid changing circumstances. We call them systems conveners. And this is really the heart of it for me. Their stance is both visionary, big new ideas about how things could work, and pragmatic, really focusing on the pragmatism of what needs to change and how it can actually change, which all of those quadrants lack. They look at the social landscape in which they operate, an organization, a city, a community, a country, or the world, and they see unrealized potential that exists across traditional boundaries and silos. Now, to me, that means they are drawing a different boundary. They're seeing a different way of understanding the world, whether it's patient safety in the NHS, whether it's Charles Morone, a former city engineer in the United States, leading a pragmatic movement to create sustainable places that are not limited by their design and the maximum of their tax take and their zoning to never be self-supporting. Whether it's people seeing a world in which violence against women and girls does not exist. It's a vision that needs a reframing of how things are done, which therefore needs a reframing of what the boundaries of the organization are. Oh, nice comment from Stephen there. Huge links to asset-based community development, although there are definitional differences as well, I think. Great to have you here, Stephen. And I won't go through this in detail, but I want to flag up that there are these 7 elements that were highlighted by the Wenger trainers in their book. And I think this is really interesting. So the conveners themselves create a convening call, a vision, a story, a narrative about a different way of doing things. They seek and build legitimacy. Very easy when you're trying to change a system to be a rebel, to be the outsider, to glory in not being listened to and being different from the system. And actually, that can be a self-limiting position. If you actually want to change the world, you actually have to think, how can I get the legitimacy to do so? Then there are 3 steps, which are convening, creating the space in which people can join you in that vision and therefore inevitably adapt to that vision and use that legitimacy that you've got to create the legitimacy of the new vision. So those are boundaries. Now, specifically, this is described as working across boundaries. It's also worth, what I said was thinking about a differently drawn boundary, thinking about a different way of conceiving of our current situation. I think that's quite relevant. Then there's identity. That means we becomes a different we, becomes a group of people, a place, a culture, and a profession that sees itself in a different way, right? Where boundary changes, identities will follow. Where identity changes, boundaries will follow. Those things are tightly looped. Then there is agency, creating the possibility for individuals and groups to actually make that shift, right? So it's no good if you just change that. You've got conceptually changed the boundary and we're seeing ourselves differently, but we don't have the agency. That means that you have to then move into thinking about power, issues of power. What is blocking us from moving into this new space, this newly defined, quote, system? And as we start to create value, really focus on that value that builds the power, that builds the agency, that builds the vision, that builds the legitimacy, that actually helps you to move through the change. So that's my attempt at a short nutshell of what I think systems convening is. Book is really nuanced, well worth reading. It is social learning, which is what the Wenger trainers do. And what they're identifying is not a set of case studies that they're trying to, fake a thing out of. It is patterns of social learning. And what I think they're incredibly powerful at, Etienne Wenger was the person who created the concept of communities of practice, for good and ill, and I might come back to that later if there's time. They're very powerful at naming things into existence, finding a thing that's special, that's unique, that's different, and giving it a name. And it's not for nothing that lots of people, when they were interviewed or when they were told they were systems conveners, or just when they read the book and saw, whoa, there's a thing called a systems convener, were moved to tears because they finally recognized something that they'd done that didn't fit into any other categories, but which was given a name in this process. And important also to spend a moment saying what systems convening is not. And they're very clear, the Wenger trainers, maybe they're uncomfortable with the word systems being in there. And let me be clear, I'm doing this session to try and think about systems convening in the light of systems practice, systems thinking, systems leadership, and systems change, because I believe in those things and I see a connection, right? But systems convening is a social learning approach. It is not inherently a systems approach, but many systems conveners actually come later to complexity, to systems thinking, maybe even to cybernetics, and go, whoa, this is what I've been doing all of my life. They have an inherent, innate sense of it. They've got an innate sense that if you change the boundaries, you change the framing, you change the language, you change the world. And then they see it in systems thinking and related fields. I'm going to be a little bit controversial here because there may be people on this call who have been recruited to job specifications that call them systems conveners. And I don't think it's programmable. I don't think you can recruit to a systems convening role. I don't think, unless you happen to find the people who are already passionate, who are already self-directed, who are already there in full doing that work, and then you back them. I don't think you can plan it. I actually don't think you can teach it. I think you can learn it. You can share and learn together. You also can't do systems convening within defined boundaries. You can't bring somebody in and say, right, you're a systems convener. This is your convening call. These are the boundaries across which you operate. Off you go. Because it's explicitly outside of the existing framing, hierarchy, power dynamics, interacting constructively with them, but outside of them. It's not something that actually fits within them. I'd love to talk further to Surrey folks about that. There may be a useful version of it that can be institutional, organizational, but as described in the book, systems convening to me is outside of existing institutions. I think that's really important. And by the way, so often in public services, when we use the phrase the system, which is a risky phrase anyway, because systems are ways of understanding the world. They're not out there in the world. They're ways of us creating an understanding and a practical way of working in the world. That's what I think. When we say the system in public services, we think the system is the council working with primary care providers and the hospital, right? Now, that is a set of institutions. That is not a system. It could conceivably be a functioning institutional system. It very rarely is, despite all of our best efforts, but that is absolutely not the system. The system is the context in which you live and understand and make sense of your life in this case. Louise has pointed out that, yeah, there's a huge thing in the world. Of course, when you say system, most people think IT. So I did a post on this topic this morning. Somebody's reply was something like, I work on systems and the data that flows between them. But yes, well, that's kind of relevant, but it's not the same thing. Systems convening also isn't a method or a theory. It's not a stepwise approach, but what they have done, the Wenger trainers, is distilled some of the essence of it out. Okay, now I'm going to move into talking about some of the systems approaches and how they relate a little bit to systems thinking. Lots more in the links, lots more that we can maybe follow up in creative ways after this session. This is just going to be a flavor, giving you a flavor of things, okay? So first of all, systems leadership. And again, I have a Google alert for systems leadership. Almost all of the things that the Google alert tells me are the leadership of health and education systems in the United States of America. And by that, they mean a group of institutions or organizations, if you see what I mean. So that's basically an easy mistake to make. However, systems leadership, like so many of these things, I use that phrase multivalent terms. Sounds very impressive. I heard it a couple of days ago on a podcast, and I thought it was a useful phrase to use today. They mean lots of different things to lots of different people. So I've written a couple of pieces that are linked on the mural that try and disambiguate what systems leadership means in its multiple meanings, if you see what I mean. And for me, there's two dimensions of what systems leadership tends to be. So there's better leadership of the system, maybe getting leaders in institutional organizational systems to use systems thinking, to use adaptive leadership, to be more empathetic, etc., etc. There's an alternative meaning of systems leadership, which is very much about our existing system does not have legitimate authority. What we need to do is we need to create a new system of legitimate authority, which replaces it. So if those of you are familiar with collective action, which was basically started in the Bronx, when community leaders set up their own parallel institutions, their own schools, their own health care, and so on. They were, in a sense, creating a parallel and then taking over institutional roles from failed, non-legitimate authorities. That's one way of looking at it, at least. Then there's a lot of systems leadership, which is about, hey, we're all in the same place, all trying to achieve related topics. Can we not function better as a system? There's a lot of systems leadership, which is about kind of systems innovation. Can we help this system to come up with better ideas for doing what it's trying to do? Can we support the system to develop itself and be more legitimate in what it's doing? Those are very closely related now I look at it, aren't they? Probably if you look in the article 3 and 4 are quite similar. So does anybody want to sort of just quickly, so I hear another voice in the room, I can take a sip of water. So where, if anywhere, might systems convening fit on this map? Is systems convening about increasing systems effectiveness? Is it about pushing critical challenge of legitimacy of existing power? Anybody want to chip in a bit?
Hello there. Yes, it's Neil Pakenham-Walsh here from HIFA, Healthcare Information for All.
Hi, Neil.
Hi. Just to, as I've put in the chat, one of the things that isn't captured in this idea of systems leadership, but which is, I think, as you've described, a feature of systems convening, is the development and successful progress towards a common vision.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, that's great. That's great. And I guess this is where I put things like future search, search conferences, and kind of collaborative design techniques that do something like what you just described in box 4 here. It's all debatable, but it's ways of seeing and trying to say, oh, there's a lot of different meanings of this. I'm going to move on because I'm short of time. I put it roughly here, but with a real distinction. The way I would phrase systems convening in this framing would be systems conveners learn with the people in the system to redefine the system. So it's not quite creating a new set of legitimate authority. It's not quite better leadership of the system because it's redefining the system. And it's not quite developing the existing system. It's something a little bit different. And this is why I think it is a real and quite distinct thing. Guy Perrier in the chat has asked, what's, I assume, my take on Peter Block's notion of stewardship as opposed to leadership? And the short answer to that is, if you have to choose a guru, Peter Block is a very good guru. I think everything he says is powerful, insightful, and often very, very challenging to even those of us who think we're change agents and changing things. He's quite confronting to a lot of people in that context as well. So I think it's a powerful, useful concept. I think it's very relevant here. What's your take, Guy? Please put in the chat. And Namrata has used system service. So there's also a lot of talk about systems stewards, which I've been seeing a lot recently in the human learning systems movement. In the new publication, they talk about systems stewards. There's just a sense in which I want to distinguish all of that from systems convening, because systems convening is about almost bringing together and birthing a new system, which is not, a complete alternative to the old. It's a new framing, a new set of boundaries, a new way of seeing the old system. So just as with systems leadership, systems change is a giant universe of good stuff and bad stuff. And I'm just going to give you a framework that we created to think about systems change. So systems change is the concept of entering into a system as a part of the system or as an outsider and changing it. Fairly straightforward in that sense, I guess. And it's usually used in a similar context to some of that more radical right-hand side systems leadership. It's normally used to talk about shifting the system to a new and different place. So if the big picture is that outcomes arise from complex adaptive systems, the 4 steps, or maybe the 4 steps of systems change, for me, trying to reduce it to one version of the essentials, is who are we and what are we here for? What is our legitimacy? What is our role, our permission? What's our relationship to the system? And most systems changes charge in without actually thinking about, without interrogating what their relationship really is to the system. So they might come in from the outsiders as well-funded colonialist thinking people to change the system and liberate the poor, sick, miserable people in the system without actually doing any work to understand whether the poor, sick, miserable people want to be liberated, et cetera, et cetera. So if we don't question who are we and what are we here for in relation to the system, we're going to be bringing in a lot of assumptions. We still are, but at least we can question them. Then how do we actually understand the system? And this is where systems thinking practice comes in really powerfully. Ways of actually modeling, creating a framework and creating a felt deep understanding of what the system is, and perhaps objectifying it so we can all stand back and look at it, so we can all look at it as a thing apart from ourselves rather than the sea in which we swim. Third step is intervening in the system. If you've got a good model, a good understanding, and you really think you understand how things will change, then is the time to test and learn that. And that's a lot, then there's a lot of learning, right? So the point is here that these are logical levels. They're not really linear steps. You've got to do all 4 of these simultaneously if you're going to achieve systems change. And that there's rich learning about whoever's doing the change, the intervening, needs to be learning about their own interventions, about their own way of seeing the system, and about their own identity. And that's a huge part of the systems convening work. And the system itself might learn about the work it does, about the way it understands the world, and about what it is, what its identity is. And by the way, all of these things feed to and from each other. I'm not going to go into this smaller writing. I'll leave you to explore on the slides or the mural that I will send round. So Stephen Barnett has asked, just to try to apply this thinking to a contemporary issue in England, are the integrated care systems at all? And are the ICB CEOs, chairs, potential systems leaders? Stephen, the really honest answer for me only, is they are at best systems of cooperating institutions, and they're probably not even that. They are probably an attempt to create some coherence and some alignment and some organization between different organizations, different institutions. And I think that's kind of fair enough, but I think, so the aspiration is great. We have done, we'll be publicizing and sharing freely a thing called the situational, well, what's it called? A strategic commissioning options appraisal for folks in adult social care doing commissioning. And that tries to take a systems approach to say, what is our context? What is constraining us in this context? What's enabling us? And what are we actually doing in terms of creating an actual health and social care system? But you might have a very constrained view of that system as services we provide to poor, sick, miserable people who need health and care. Or you might have a very all-encompassing view of that system, which could be, are we creating a place that is supportive of well-being? Or could be even, are we creating a world that's supportive of well-being, frankly? And frankly, most people are way down at the bottom end of that scope, are much more thinking about provision of services, buying services, quality of services, a bit of joining up between services if you're lucky, and a bit of public health kind of prevention kind of around the edges. They're not at the stage of thinking about, are we creating a system of well-being for the place? But they might be. So there's that range, there's that possibility. And our ICB CEOs, chairs, potential systems leaders, yeah, I take it in the context of everything I've just said. maybe, could be. Now we're on to systems practice and systems thinking. I told you this would be a canter, didn't I? Hopefully this is interesting, and thanks for keeping the chat going to show me that people are really responding to stuff. Systems practice and systems thinking. Right now, this is the brave bit for me. This has been a scary session to prepare for because it's trying to encapsulate quite a lot. Now, my idea of what the core of systems thinking is, I use two quotes. Wittgenstein said, "To understand is to know what to do." And McIntyre said, "I can only answer the question, what am I to do, if I can answer the question before that, of which story or stories do I find myself a part?" So two philosophers, I think they're both systems thinkers, but they wouldn't necessarily have called themselves that. And the point here is that meaning and value, which are the things that are really important in making decisions and in creating value in the world, and in, lots of us are in public service. They're really important things in working in public services. Work in a context. They only exist in a context. And so what do I mean by that, right? I mean that the world is very complex. If you look close enough, you will find that the things that you think are things are hard to put boundaries around, and are hard to fully define in ways where they can't just slip out of your grasp every now and again. People who are in medicine, because there's a lot of people here from the health sector, will probably understand this, because there's a nice concept that somebody can come in with a headache and you can give them a headache pill and the headache will go away and the job is done. But actually, it's a lot more complex than that, right? That's why I absolutely love House MD, the TV series, because that's absolutely about complexity, systems thinking, and cybernetics. Somebody might come in with a headache, and it might be, because they've got a puppy and it's driving them insane. You might give them a headache pill, and it might cause some kind of hemorrhage, and they die. The headache might actually be related to a foot injury that they sustained 15 years ago. Complexity means that you've got both nebulosity, that uncertainty, that unpredictability, that hardness to pin things down until you define the rules by which you're pinning them down. But then the rules become the thing which the world works around. And they've got pattern. There are predictable patterns. Most people with a certain type of symptoms and a certain type of test results will respond to a certain type of treatment. Most of the time, there's a pattern definitely on there. But all of the pattern and nebulosity, the complexity of the world, can be interpreted in lots of different ways. So we have to look at the Handbook of Psychiatric Medicine. The way in which we define whether people are mentally unwell. It's all putting lines in the sand on a beach with a tide coming in and going out, and trying to define what things are firm and what things are not firm by saying, yeah, we think this is a thing, we're going to name this a thing, right? So the only way we can make sense, the only way we can know what to do by knowing what story we're in, is by creating distinctions, by creating framings, by allowing ways of seeing to emerge. So we say, this is what we define as a headache. This is the meaning of a headache. If you respond to this, this, and this test, that's a headache, right? There's a wonderful thing. I don't know if it's still a proper medical thing. Is it called SUDS? The subjective pain thing, where you say on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain are you in? And that's an actual thing, or it was for a while at least. So we need that. We need those brackets around the world with definitions attached to make complexity manageable. Oh, I love the idea of a vague symptom clinic. Thanks, Liz. I'm going to hold on to that one. So to generate that meaning and value, and then meaning and value come bundled up with purpose, because once you have a sense of what this means to me and what I should value, then you have a sense of purpose, because I want to create more of what is valued. And that then comes legitimacy, right? So these are things that we say are valuable. These are the people who are in charge of creating the things that are valuable. They have legitimacy, but legitimacy also converts power. So they turn out to be powerful people. And what if the legitimacy that they got from doing the right thing, they decide to use just to help themselves and do the wrong thing, because their framing is slightly different and they see the world in a different way? That brings in ethics. So the point is, we put boundaries around the world, we define things, we shape our world, and our world shapes us. And that means that we ignore certain things, right? That we create things that are discussable and things that are undiscussable. We have cues for behavior. We understand based on training, based on context, based on the way, what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. If you go to the partnership board and start screaming and shouting, even if you believe passionately that something's going wrong, then you're actually going to get kicked out for inappropriate behavior, not for the quality of your argument. So that's how we frame things. And we create this sense of stability and meaning and purpose and understanding. Thank you, Karen. That's a wonderful reference. Sorting things out is very apposite book to what I'm talking about. But the complexity of the world is still out there. It's still possible to understand the world in lots of different ways. And suddenly we can get this big learning shock. Well, we thought the world was this way. We thought geopolitics worked in this way, but it turns out that it doesn't. We thought that diseases worked in this way. We thought that COVID was like the flu, but it turned out that it wasn't, whatever the thing may be, right? So we can get the, oh no, my world has been turned upside down. This happens in divorce. It happens when stable countries break up and fragment themselves. You get the idea. We can also go, whoa, this system of worldwide capitalism that was really great and bringing us lots of riches and lots of wealth and lots of single-use disposable plastic bottles, he says as a bit of a hypocrite here. Actually, there might be a problem with that. So we can understand that our framing, even though in the context of our original framing, it all seemed good, we may have had reservations back then. I read The Iron Man in 1980. Turns out that framing was limited and that we're now seeing a bigger problem that our framing and our behaviors based on what we defined before has created. And not only that, but the people who are the poor, sick, miserable people, the people who are the service deliverers, the people who are the managers, and the people who are the systems leaders, turns out they're all having a different view of the world because they're all living in different ways, doing different jobs day to day. So you've already got built in these different perspectives and different ways of framing and different ways of understanding, if you see what I mean. Rich people buy luxury goods to prove their resources, not necessarily because they want the goods, because they want the social status it confers. So these are three different reasons. And the fourth one is people will do weird things. People cannot be controlled. People have agency. People will respond in unpredictable, unexpected ways. All of those things can break open our way of understanding meaning and value and defining the world. That's good, though, because it means we can learn. It means we can actually act differently. We can reframe. We can change our identity. And my understanding of systems complexity and cybernetics, that it's about taking that bundle of things, the understanding is knowing what to do. I can do that if I know what story I'm in. We create the stories by creating a framing, shutting things out, choosing what we notice, attenuating variety, to use the systems language. But that framing is inherently unstable because it doesn't absorb the complexity of the world. Therefore, it will crack or break or shatter from time to time, and that creates the possibility of learning and novelty. Well, that was a bit of a canter. So, okay, deep breath. What the hell do I do with that? I mean, part of it for me is just seeing that. Define your definitions. Show the limits of what you're looking at and what you're not looking at. Accept that you're in that interplay, as Karen says. Thank you, Karen. Between structure and agency. And that's what practice is all about. Thank you, Karen. If you want good ways of doing this, there's lots out there. And they can all be done really badly. So it's a practice, it's about learning. It's about being incompetent at first. It's about learning from others who are doing it, not as gurus, but as people who've been down the path before you. So fantastic book out by Patrick Hoverstadt, The Grammar of Systems, which I highly recommend. It's quite readable. It's got 33 underlying systems laws in it. It's quite practical. It's at the theory level, but it tells you how things work. If you want to get a nice starter list of systems approaches in the SCIO professional competency framework or the level 7 apprenticeship, there are lists you can see here, what we talked about as the biggest, most widely used systems methods or approaches. And we also put in that competency framework, understand the applicability, benefits, and limits of each system, understand the relevance of determining what the scope is, how you apply, which method or steps or approach you're applying to which framing. So you've got to reflect the systems thinking on itself. So this is all about having a toolkit, not having just a hammer and not going around hitting everything, but being able to adapt. And if you want to expose yourself to some systems complexity and cybernetics arguments, go and look in one of the groups and you'll see lots of people arguing with each other about what's what. So there are two big mistakes we can make in systems thinking. And we can not understand that the different worlds that we're encountering, the different experiences, the different things. You've probably all heard this story of the 12 blind men, and one that says elephants are sharp and pointy, and the other says elephants are really smelly and stinky, but a bit like kind of snakes. Not understanding that we're interacting with different parts of a system. But the other, and this is the type 1 error, isn't it? But the type 2 error is, and I got this from Gerald Midgley, but he didn't draw it. I'm not sure where it came from originally. And this is what a lot of systems leadership is guilty of, is assuming that there is a system there, that there is a whole elephant. And in any case, thinking back to what I said before in my definitions of systems thinking, there is no whole elephant to see, because here we're standing in a particular perspective, seeing the whole elephant. But we can only see one side of the elephant. It might be a fake elephant. It might be a fascia of an elephant. And these people in this world down here, this blind man, sorry for the disabled language, who's experiencing the elephant as sharp and pointy, there's really no point persuading them that this is a whole elephant unless you can do something to alleviate their position of being at the sharp, pointy, dangerous end, right? So these are those different worlds that I was talking about. And yes, it's powerful and useful to understand that from this perspective, where we're standing in relation to this manga, we're actually seeing a whole elephant. That how can we take that to them? And this is where those systems convening practices come back again with a narrative to say, you're interacting in this world where everything's sharp and pointy and dangerous. You're actually part of an elephant. And they might go, well, so what? Bugger off, So you've got to build your legitimacy and your skill and your reframing, and you've got to have an idea about how to change that based on that knowledge. All right, well, so here is the kind of steps again, the core steps. And I'm doing okay for time, considering how badly I thought I might do. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to I'm going to do it. I'm going to break you into breakout rooms for 3 minutes to take a deep breath, think about what you've come up with, and just think about one way. And then I'll create a thing on the mural board for you to post it. So somebody log into the mural board and have a look. Think about one way in which any of the systems things that I've talked about can support and link into the 7 things that systems conveners do. Okay. So 56, 53, lots of people are leaving now. I've done the breakout room thing, 10, 12. I'm just working out how many rooms we need. And I'm going to give you 4 minutes. Okay, starting. Oh, hang on, let me set the settings properly. Okay. And at 4 minutes, I'm going to bring you back very, very promptly afterwards, starting now. So welcome back, everybody. I know that was very, very short. I hope it was of interest. And what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to give the very short advert now and ask people to complete the checkout poll. I'm going to ask you to put a point of interest from your discussion into the chat, and we will capture the chat and share it on the mural board, and it'll be available for you all after the event as well. If you would like more of this stuff on an ongoing basis, this is what I do. bring together small groups. I do consultancy and all kinds of other things as well, so feel free to engage. But the Red Quadrant Way Toolshed brings together small cohorts who study a set of materials on leading transformation together and do action learning around systems related ways of doing change in organizations, particularly service organizations. And the link down there at the bottom will take you into an explanation, includes the price, includes the discussion and all the rest, excuse me. So thank you for joining and being engaged in this helter-skelter run through how systems convening might relate to some of these other concepts. As I said, I set out a lot of groundwork around, little bits of ways of understanding each of these things as we go. I'd love to hear your comments and get you to check out in the way that you did before. But now anybody who wants to comment, I'm happy to stick around for an extra 10 minutes or so. Please come on the microphone. You can put your hand up if you want to, but I think that's a dirty practice that's leaked over from Microsoft Teams. So just talk if you can. Any final questions, comments? They're going to have to be fairly quick, but we've got a little bit of time if people are willing to stay over. If you've got to leave now to jump onto your next meeting, I would really value if you can complete the Slido survey just to give us the feedback. That would be fantastic. Anybody? Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Nikki. Good few people on the screen. There were some questions I think I missed in the chat. Does anybody want to share any of those?
Hi, Ben. It's Des Brown here.
Hi, Des.
Just sharing a very brief conversation we had in our breakout room, which was around, the question came up around challenging, when you're working with others, challenging what they call a system. For you can see it's not a system. We didn't get an answer to that because of the time, but I just thought it was an interesting question and around who you are as a interventionist or a change agent, what that means for you.
Yeah. So do you mean challenging their definitions in a way?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't advise directly doing that too often. It's a kind of curmudgeon move, isn't it? and a way to not have your expertise listened to, I suspect. I don't go in and go, to the ICS board and say, well, you call yourself system, but you're just really a bunch of organizations. I mean, I might say that in the right context if there was enough opportunity, but I might say, well, you're really defining an institutional system here, and that's fair enough. But there's a broader system out there, because actually the way people live their lives and the influences and other people they interact with and so on are quite big determinants of health as well, as are all the known determinants of health, which are not necessarily driven by our system. So yeah, I think you can enter into it in more gentle and productive ways than perhaps I have today, because I was, charging through. But yeah, a system is a way of understanding the world. But if people are using the world system in a way that's meaningful to them, the most important thing is just to make sure they don't confuse it with other uses, I guess.
So, Benjamin, it's Nikki. One of the things I've done in the past, when you've got these multiple organisations come together, when they're trying to sort out a problem together, but no one of them has power to exert over the whole system, is call it a virtual system. Because if you don't call it a system, you can't then apply systems approaches. So one of the useful tools that I find is the viable systems model. Because if you're saying, right, so you want to coordinate these things in, who's going to allocate resources? Who's going to resolve conflict? Who's going to look for signs of stress across this holistic view? So it allows you to step into it by calling it a virtual system. You recognise there's no single organisation with power or authority that can make decisions, and everything will have to be collaborative. But it's still seen to be a system. Well, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, great tip. Thank you. It is like, that's really saying, imagine if we did operate as a system,
yes.
What would that look like?
Yes. What would we want to design it like? What would make it a viable system?
Yeah.
What functions would it need?
Thomas, you've asked, is the system boundary defined by the members of the system? It's flexible as people join and leave. Now I know this is a bit philosophical, but I do think that it is the case that in an ideal world, we would use the word system to reference our ways of understanding what's going on out there. And we wouldn't say that is the system. We would say that this is my understanding of the system. That's not how people operate. I get that. But I think, that would be ideal. So is the system boundary defined by the members of the system? Well, if you're looking at a system made up of a group of members, then yes, the system will change as people join and leave. And if you look at a care system, then, or maybe a commercial care system in the United States, sometimes it will make an acquisition or it'll build a new hospital, and then the care system has changed. And that's a set of institutions, a set of organizations working as a company in a health context. So that's just what that is, if you see what I mean. I think your question is definitional, so it depends how you define it. But both ways are legitimate, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know if you want to comment back, Thomas. But,
One of the observations I would make, and we made in our group, was I am generally an external consultant coming in to help someone, a group of people, a group of organisations with a problem. But I am generally quite surprised by the number of times when I go in, someone says, "Oh, this is the first time we've ever got together." Yeah. And you sit there thinking, well, why? I don't have a dog in this fight. I have no vested interest in this. But even I can see that to do the things you need to do, you need to come together and have some conversations. Why do we think the owners of those challenges, that situation they're facing, don't convene? What are the barriers? I find it difficult to understand.
Well, one of the barriers, I think, is hinted at by that slide where I said we make worlds in which things make sense. And the more you engage with the world outside your own institutional context, the more risk there is that something disconfirming will happen. And I often talk in organizational development terms when I'm trying to get people to have constructive conversations, to talk at the level of their own thinking and their selection of facts and their emotions about something, rather than just advocacy of a position. I often say that we often settle for what I call the devil's bargain, where we're very vague with each other and we don't call each other on our letdowns, and we don't hold each other to account. And that means that we're always quite disappointed with each other. Stop me if this is familiar in any care systems. But we never have to be held to account ourselves. So we never have to confront any of the real problems. We can just complain about them. And complaining about them has quite a good social currency, because we can take somebody out for a drink and have a good moan and drain them of energy. We feel a lot better. So there's a local optima, which is not confronting things and avoidance, and it's much easier to complain about that lot over there letting us down every time than it is to get in a room and realize that we're letting them down as well.
I have something to add to that, Nikki. I think people don't have the practices. They think that just making an agenda is a way to have a meeting, and you actually have to design these meetings. You have to think about how you're going to host people. And what I'm finding in our work is people don't have those tools, and sometimes just bringing a few things in, they can get inspired by, like, oh, this is how you actually have an engaged meeting where people can see themselves in this work and see the possibilities. And I don't know. I don't know if anybody else has that experience, but
I'm totally with you, Karen. This is Mercedes, and I believe that the convening sets so much the tone. And Nikki and I, we were in the same breakout. Thanks, Nikki, for bringing this back, because I believe that in that convening, in those first 3 seconds, whether you've had a relationship for a while, you're meeting for the first time, is where all of our narratives get kicked in, right? How the rituals, who gets called out, lets me know, am I really going to have a conversation, or as Benjamin's talking about, or continue covering up and putting on a mask? It starts from that invitation to that meeting.
And quite often challenging who your customer thinks ought to be on that invitation. I'm normally pushing the boundaries of, well, they are still part of this. They have a stake. And if you don't recognize that stake and engage them in this conversation, you might struggle with designing the right approach, and certainly with implementing that right approach. So that can be one of the, the starting conversations is yes, but no, but. That's your normal clique of people you prefer to go to and give you the right answers, won't they? Rather than the people you think might give you some of the answers that are unpalatable.
Well, I think that's where the conversation also starts with, are we doing the work ourselves as practitioners? Because that in the first bat, do we have the courage to even write and go in that tone and direction? And have we started by asking ourselves the question, what am I getting out of this and what's my role? Because that's where the power play, especially these days, is really showing up.
And I think some of that comes back to Benjamin's pointing at the purpose. So if you think, what am I trying to achieve? And you think, well, who do I need to be engaged in this conversation to achieve that? That automatically starts broadening your understanding of the holistic system. So you can start structuring those conversations. Well, you said this is what you want to achieve. These people are in that bit of the space. You can't achieve objective A unless you engage with these people, because they either control that or they have a strong influence over it. So that going straight back to purpose, or starting with purpose and what are you trying to achieve, I find really useful.
Starting with purpose, but iterating back to it occasionally is an important part of that as well, I think.
Yeah, none of these conversations are linear.
Can I ask a question, if that's all right? Just around thinking about this constructive engagement, and I think Benjamin, earlier you were talking about you wouldn't go into ICB and say, right, you're not the system, or what, that's sort of confrontational. And I'm just thinking about that sort of range between saying, right, these are the structures that need to change, these are the hierarchy that needs to change, this is the entities that need to change, and sort of really small changes in the way things are done, in the way people think, and how they both in a sense have an impact on the system, and where those that they kind of sit at the end of those scales, and is there too small as well as there being too big, or is it, do people think it's like we go?
Well, there is too small, because consistently when we approach the kind of systems change that I have a feeling most people in this room want, we settle for the symbolic change. I'm constantly reminded that in 2002, when we were introducing contact centres into local governments, the concept there was that there would be an empowered board level representative of the citizen, the customer, who would drive change and BPR throughout the organisation, which would revolutionise the way we delivered service. And the little compromise to get that going was, well, if we take 80% of the calls and we deal with them 80% well, that'd be a pretty big step. That'd be a pretty good step in the right direction. And not only did we stop there and lie about what the percentages actually meant, that meant that instead of the empowered customer driving the way the organization worked to be responsive to customer needs, we'd created a place where we could blame all of our failings, or at least have all of the arguments about the failings with people who are disempowered to do anything about it. And therefore the people who weren't in contact with the customers could live their life without being too bothered by it. So we got completely the opposite result from what we'd achieved. And the same thing is, that's very, very easily the case. And that's the question of power dynamics. It's a question, it's a kind of failed systems convening story, in a sense, incredibly successful in generating change, and quite large scale change, but too small to actually make the difference it's set out to achieve.
Thanks.
So I know people have to go. I said 10 minutes. We've gone 11 minutes over. I guess we should wrap up now. Hopefully, if you've not already, you will sign up to the Systems Convening mailing list. If the links are in the thing, but if you Google Systems Convening Wenger Trainer, then you will find their page with the book and the mailing list, and we can carry on the conversation there. There is a subgroup called Systems Etc. or something, which is designed to protect the large main list from people arguing about systems things. So you might want to join that subgroup as well. So thanks, everybody. I've really appreciated your engagement, sticking on to the end, and I'll speak to you all soon, I hope. Bye-bye.